Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. Continuing with our look at the NHL expansion class of 1967 that doubled the NHL's size and ended the era of the original six, we come to the team set up at the gateway to the West, the St. Louis Blues.
When the NHL was setting up for its great expansion for the 1967-68 season, St. Louis, Missouri was the last city chosen to gain entry into the league, thanks mainly to the Wirtz family who owned the Chicago Blackhawks and the St. Louis Arena. Since the Wirtzes were looking to sell the St. Louis Arena, they used their influence to pressure the league to grant an expansion team to insurance tycoon Sid Solomon Jr. in St. Louis instead of one for Baltimore, Maryland. Named after the famous W.C. Handy song St. Louis Blues, this new club was originally coached by former New York Rangers star Lynn Patrick and featured such seasoned veterans as forward Dickie Moore, defenseman Doug Harvey, and goaltender Glenn Hall. The club's first game came on October 11, 1967, as the Blues played the Minnesota North Stars to a 2-2 draw. St. Louis would struggle in their first 19 games that year, going 4-13-2. At that point, Lynn Patrick resigned as coach and was replaced by his assistant coach, Scotty Bowman. Under Bowman, the Blues posted a winning record for the remainder of the season, finishing third in the new West Division behind Philadelphia and Los Angeles. Entering their club's first playoff series that year, they faced the division-winning Philadelphia Flyers. The Blues would jump off to a surprising 3-1 lead over the Flyers, only to have Philadelphia claw their way back to force the series into a Game 7. However, thanks to the goaltending of Glenn Hall, the Blues took Game 7 3-1 to knock off the favored Flyers. In the second round, St. Louis once again found themselves in a Game 7 scenario, this time against the Minnesota North Stars. This Game 7 would be much closer than the last one, heading into overtime before Ron Schock scored the game and series winner for the Blues to send them to the Stanley Cup Finals. Unfortunately for St. Louis, their opponent in the finals would be the league's top-ranked team, the Montreal Canadiens. Even though each game would be decided by only a single goal, the Canadiens would sweep aside the Blues in 4 games to lay claim to the 1968 Stanley Cup title. However, despite being on the losing end of the series, the Blues goaltender Glenn Hall was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy for the MVP of the playoffs. In their sophomore year, St. Louis added goaltending legend Jacques Plante to their roster to split net duties with Glenn Hall. Together, this new goaltending duo would win the Vezina Trophy for the fewest goals against, and lead the Blues to a first-place finish in the West Division. St. Louis then entered the 1969 playoffs as a seemingly unstoppable force, sweeping Philadelphia and then Los Angeles to return to the Stanley Cup Finals for a second consecutive year. But when it came to the finals, the Blues suffered a repeat of history, as they were swept by the Montreal Canadiens once again. For the 1969-70 season, the Blues would win their second consecutive division title, and once again march through the playoffs to reach the Stanley Cup Finals for the 3rd year in a row. In a rare year without the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs, St. Louis squared off against the Boston Bruins in the finals. But, like Montreal did over the previous 2 seasons, Boston swept the Blues in 4 games, the last of which ended with Bobby Orr's iconic overtime goal to give the Bruins the 1970 Stanley Cup.
Following that third disappointment in the finals, goaltender Jacques Plante would leave the club for Toronto, and the aging Glenn Hall would only play in 31 of the Blues' regular season games in the 1970-71 season, with the remaining time being filled by Ernie Wakely. This season, St. Louis would settle for a second-place finish in their division, and for the first time in their team's history, fail to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, after losing to the Minnesota North Stars 4-2 in the opening round.
The Blues suffered even more losses after that, with Glenn Hall retiring, coach Scotty Bowman leaving for Montreal, and star center Red Berenson getting dealt to Detroit. On the bright side, the Berenson trade did bring in another star center by the name of Gary Unger, who would go on to score at least 30 goals a season in 8 consecutive seasons for the Blues, while also breaking the NHL's record for consecutive games played. Dropping down another peg to third in the West Division, the Blues entered the 1972 playoffs against the Minnesota North Stars. The series would shift back and forth during the first 6 games before St. Louis avenged their defeat at the hands of Minnesota from the previous year with a dramatic 2-1 overtime win in Game 7. The Blues would not fare so well in the semifinals, though, losing 4 straight to Boston to conclude their season. Over the next 2 years, St. Louis would continue to fall in the standings during the regular season until they finished out of playoff contention for the first time in their club's history at the close of the 1973-74 season. At the start of the next year, the league realigned into 4 new divisions, and St. Louis was placed in the relatively weak Smythe Division. This year, the Blues would finish second in their new division, just 2 points back of the Vancouver Canucks, to earn a ticket back into the playoffs. Unfortunately, they were quickly dispatched by Pittsburgh in the opening preliminary round 2-0. Over the next 4 years, the Blues would fail to finish with an above 500 record, though they would still manage to make the playoffs in 2 of those 4 years, albeit with little to no success once there, and even nab the Smythe Division crown in 1976-77.
Unfortunately, while the Blues were underperforming during this time, deferred contracts that were becoming due and pressures brought on by the presence of the WHA put the club on the brink of financial collapse. At one point, the Solomons even cut the team's staff down to 3 employees, one of which was Emile Francis, who served as not only the team president, but also the general manager and coach. Fortunately, in 1977, the Solomons would sell the club to St. Louis-based pet food giant Ralston Purina in a deal which was structured to ensure that the Blues would stay in St. Louis.
After coming off the club's worst year to date in the 1978-79 season, the Blues rebounded to finish with an even 34-34-12 record, earning a second-place ranking in their division and a berth in the 1980 playoffs. Sadly, this would be another first-round elimination for the Blues, with Chicago beating them in 3 straight games. However, the Blues came back even stronger for the 1980-81 season that followed. Led by team captain Brian Sutter, right winger Wayne Babich, who notched 54 goals, center Bernie Federko, who compiled 104 points, and goaltender Mike Liut, St. Louis finished at the top of their division and with the second-best record in the whole league. In the playoffs this year, the Blues would also finally win a series for the first time since 1972, when they defeated the Penguins in the preliminary round after 5 games. Riding high into their quarterfinals match against the New York Rangers, the Blues would take Game 1 by a 6-3 score. But from that point on, New York dominated the rest of the series to eliminate St. Louis in 6 games. To start the 1981-82 season, the Blues were realigned into the Norris Division, and in their first 3 years in this new division would again post below 500 records, while still managing to make the playoffs in each year.
During this time, Purina was looking to unload the Blues franchise, which had compiled $1.8 million in losses during the company's 6-year ownership. In fact, the club came a hair's breadth away from being purchased by Edmonton Oilers founder Bill Hunter and moved to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, were it not for the intervention of the league to veto that deal. After that, Purina turned the club over to the league to rid themselves of the franchise. But luckily for St. Louis, Los Angeles businessman Harry Ernest stepped in to purchase the Blues in July of 1983, sparing the hockey club their seemingly dark fate.
In the 1983-84 season, the Blues would debut one of their picks from the 1982 draft, center Doug Gilmour, who would rack up 53 points in his rookie season. In addition to Gilmore's numbers, the 85 points contributed by Joe Mullen and the 107 points put up by Bernie Federko led the Blues to a second-place finish in the Norris Division. In the playoffs, though, their run would only go as far as the division finals, where they lost a heartbreaking Game 7 to the Minnesota North Stars 4-3 in overtime. For the 1984-85 season, the Blues would grab the top spot in their division. But again, despite a high finish in the regular season, they suffered playoff defeat at the hands of the North Stars. The 1986 playoffs would be a different story, though. Even though the Blues finished lower in the standings this year than in their previous two, they finally got their revenge on Minnesota, beating them in 5 games to advance to the Norris Division Finals. In this round, St. Louis took the series to the limit again, with a 2-1 Game 7 victory over the Toronto Maple Leafs to move past a second round of playoff action for the first time in 16 years. In the conference finals against Calgary, the Blues went down 3-2 in the series and trailed 5-2 in Game 6 with 12 minutes left to play in the game. But a goal by Brian Sutter and then 2 more by Greg Paslowski tied the game at 5 with only 1:17 left to play. The game then headed to overtime, where after a number of near misses on both ends, St. Louis's Doug Wickenheiser scored at the 7.5-minute mark to win the game for the Blues and push the series to a Game 7. Unlike Game 6, Game 7 would be a low-scoring affair. Unfortunately for the Blues, they would be at the losing end of the final 2-1 score. Though St. Louis has been home to numerous big names over the years, and their 25-year playoff streak from 1979 through 2004 ranks as the 3rd longest in NHL history, they currently remain the only active team from the 1967 expansion class yet to win a Stanley Cup. But who knows when that winning formula will finally turn up for the St. Louis Blues.